Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 2 of Libra season. Expansive astrology. I'm Melissa, and I'm here to tell you all about more about Libra. And we're using the framework of the tarot to do so. So, the tarot card that is corresponded with that rules Libra is the Justice card. We're also going to be talking about the Empress card and the Empress energy because Libra is ruled by Venus, and Venus is ruled by the Empress. And we're also going to be talking about the Suit of Swords because the swords represent air energy, and Libra is air energy. So all of this helps to kind of finish painting the picture of what Libra is, what Libra does, what Libra brings, and how we can tap into these archetypes, tap into those themes, tap into the power of all that Libra is. This helps illustrate what Libra is even further. I think the tarot does an excellent job of illustrating this even further, and which allows us to be even more intentional and even more cognizant of how we are engaging with Libra season, with Libra energy, with the moon when the moon is in Libra, right? If you have any any planets in your chart that are heavily influenced by Libra, hopefully this just helps to like complete the painting of that picture, right? So I'm gonna just get started. We're talking about Justice first. This is my favorite deck. It's the Pamela Coleman Smith and Rider Waite deck, Centennial Edition. So here's the Justice card in that deck. Justice is a really long energy. It's not necessarily something that happens swiftly. It's not some sort of magical card that restores or signifies a restoring of justice where there is injustice, if only, right? It doesn't come in and say this was unjust and imbalanced and now it's going to be balanced, if only. And we know that because there is so much injustice in the world. And we know that because if that's how the Justice card operated, there wouldn't be so much injustice. If the Justice card represented some sort of court proceeding, then every time we pulled the Justice card, we would be involved in like a court proceeding, and that doesn't happen, right? The Justice card doesn't quite show up in that way. So how does it show up? And let me give credit where credit is due. I've learned the tarot. I've used a number of different resources. I've taken a couple different classes and my own intuition in learning the tarot and reading the cards. And my main tarot teacher, who I attribute arguably most of my knowledge to, outside of just like my inner knowing and my own connection, my own intuition. Second to that is Ms. Lindsay Mack. She's brilliant. She's a wonderful tarot teacher. She's very trauma informed, and she teaches the tarot in a way that is inclusive. It's inclusive of everybody. So I highly recommend Lindsay Mack's work. And I am happy to give credit where credit is due to her because she's taught me so much. So find her, Lindsay Mack. She has a podcast. It's Tarot for the Wild Soul. She teaches courses. Brilliant woman. So this card doesn't just come in and say, oh, this is unjust, this is imbalanced, and now it's going to be balanced. We're restoring justice, right? That's not exactly what this card is all about. What it does bring, it does say that everything comes back around. It's an acknowledgement of what does exist, what is happening, rather than what we wish could be. When we pull this card, we're invited to acknowledge what is happening. Like, wake up and pull the wool away from your eyes. That's the phrase, right? Pull the wool away from your eyes and look at what is, rather than any sort of projection or denial about what we wish would be. It asks us, how can you be a means for change? In justice, we're opening our eyes to see things as they are so that we can move forward. It's an invitation to acknowledge what is, what exists, rather than what we wish there was. Seeing what is out of balance. How do we acknowledge what is so that we can tend to what's here and find more restoration, more justice, more balance? It's really looking at the state of things, including how we might be perpetuating or contributing to injustice, how injustice has been a part of our own lives and relationships. This is not something that we are keen to looking at often, right? So this requires, this encompasses and describes radical acceptance. That things in life that are not fair, how do we deal with those things that are not fair? How do we engage with radical acceptance? And I talked more about that last week, the difference between acceptance and approval. It's very important to make that distinction. We have to start with what's true. We have to start with what's actually here. We have to start with looking at the state of things in order to be able to affect change and move into a place that we'd rather be, into a place of more justice and more balance. And this is especially true when there may never be an explanation as to the why of it all. How do we deal with the times we find ourselves asking, why did this unfair thing happen to me? What was the purpose of this? This is about holding both the fact that the thing shouldn't have happened, it was unfair, we didn't need it, we didn't want it, and it is here, it has happened. So we can fight it, we can deny it, we can ignore it, or not. Or we can accept it. Again, this doesn't mean approving of the injustice. That doesn't mean approving of where we find ourselves, but we have to accept it and embrace the power that we do have over situations, even the situations that are like technically or literally out of our control and out of our power. We get to really be with and honor where we do have power. We get to question how even these things, and especially these things that are out of our control, how can we create change? Can we make it even just a little easier to live with what has happened? How can we be agents of justice and equity and empowerment and balance for all beings, and especially those who have been disenfranchised? This doesn't necessarily mean that you're a person that you're going to start a nonprofit and dedicate your life to law and justice. You don't have to run for office, right? This can mean being a little less of an asshole during an argument with your partner. That's justice work. It can mean, as Lindsay Mack taught, this can mean addressing a circumstance where abuse or violence is passed down through generations, passed down through your family line, and you're the one it stops with. That's justice work, because you have to confront the fact that there was that injustice in order to stop it in yourself and in your world, what you are creating. This is never asking us to do work around or look at things that we're not ready for or capable of. For example, if you're a person who, hopefully this is all of us, but if you're a person who really deeply feels this climate crisis, be gentle with yourself and caretake yourself and be gentle with your expectations of yourself. That's part of the work of this. You may wish that you can take on big oil and make recycling what it needs to be and stop the like, what is it? 100 corporations attribute to 71%. I don't know why. This is off the top of my head. I'm not sure if that statistic is correct, but I believe that it's just 100 corporations who contribute to like more than 70% of greenhouse emissions. This doesn't mean that you have to take on responsibility for changing that, and look at what is. Accept where you are and what you are and what you can do, what you are capable of, and do what tending you need to of yourself in order to be able to sleep at night, right? This doesn't mean that where there is injustice, it all falls onto your shoulders. It doesn't mean taking on more than we are physically and emotionally capable of taking on. It just means accepting what is, and embracing our capacity of power and our capacity to change what we can change reasonably. Justice exists in those times when we need or want to throw a tantrum or wallow. It's very, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. I hated hearing that. Hated hearing that as a kid. Or also, life isn't fair. My mom would always remind me. I'd say, "That's not fair." And she'd say, "Life isn't fair." And that's true. And that's justice. Justice, Lindsay Mack says that justice can just be like, what you got is what you got. You're in what you're in. There's no way to argue with it. And, you know, that's totally relevant when we're talking about things like the climate crisis. We have to look at where we are. We have to look at what we have created and what we are in. We have to, right? That's justice work. And it can change in a moment, but the only way that it's ever going to happen, that change is ever going to happen, is if you open your eyes and can be with what is. So the more, Lindsay Mack says that the more we're trying to create a story around why it shouldn't be this way, life is going to continue. And things are going to continue the way that they are, even if we're throwing a fit or in denial about it, right? So here, we're embracing our power to adjust by noticing where the scales may be out of balance, noticing where things change and tip. We're able to maintain our center with that ever-changing and ever-tipping and perhaps totally out of balance. We're able to maintain our center with that fact. This might not necessarily mean restoring balance or being able to restore balance to a thing. It might not necessarily mean making things more fair or making things even, making things comfortable for us again. But what it does mean is moving forward from where we are with what is in our scales, even if they are totally out of whack. And doing so in a way that is helpful and positive and just and balanced for you, in a way that feels empowered for you, given what you have been handed. Again, that might not necessarily mean or include fairness, but it means being with what is and finding center in what is. I have to say again, how divinely, how perfectly the work of Virgo season, which is the season right before Libra, sets us up to continue this work. It's beautiful. So in the card, we have the Sword of Truth, the scales of balance. a maroon tapestry, which is a symbol of the veil, the bridge to God or death itself. We have this being who is meant to represent and bring justice. So we can ask ourselves, is there something, when we pull this card or when we're in this energy, or when things are just feeling really unfair in general, like you don't even have to have a tarot deck to tap in with this and engage with this, you can ask yourself, is there something I'm being called to look at and understand that I might not necessarily want to acknowledge? Again, I think of things like climate change, where we have so much evidence to show that this is a real thing, that we are going through a mass extinction. And so many people don't want to acknowledge or look at that. We can consider things like white privilege. We can consider things like injustice or imbalance or unfairness in our relationships, where maybe it's easier to ignore than to address or even accept and look at. Is there something that you're being called to look at and understand that you might not necessarily want to? Ask yourself, what am I resisting accepting or acknowledging or looking at? Where are you putting on blinders? We all do it. We all do it. Ask yourself, where can I better step into my power and be even more of an agent for change? Within your own life and within like the collective. Where can you step into your power and be even more of an agent for change? When we're willing to do this work and take a look at these things, that's when we have the most power over them. And our brains become afraid and our brains resist looking at these things. And the more we turn away, the less power we have over them. And that might feel necessary. It might feel like self-preservation, right? To turn away from these things that we don't want to look at. And self-preservation is not power. And again, this is never going to show up asking you to look at things that you're not ready to look at, asking you to engage with things that you're not capable of or ready to engage with. This is about looking at what exists where you are and what you are capable of. So this doesn't need to be something that that we're afraid of. It doesn't have to be. It'll show up when you're ready. These things unveil themselves when we're ready to see them, when we're ready to work with them. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to take a look. You can handle it. Let me take a pause. And then we're gonna chat about the Empress. So the addition that the Empress brings to this work is beautiful. I love the Empress. Most people, I think, love the Empress. Now, the Empress is often described as like the divine feminine. It's often described as like a mother or a nurturer or just a woman. I think some people even relate it to like pregnancy and stuff, and that's reductive. It can be those things. It can represent a mother. It can represent the divine feminine, and that's not all that it is. It is so much more than that. The Empress is about expanding our threshold for receiving. So remember, this is Venus energy. And if you need a refresher, I spoke a lot about Venus last week. We have to make ourselves available to receiving what brings us pleasure. it can be really triggering and challenging to receive. It can feel unsafe to receive. It can feel selfish to receive. It can feel evil or gluttonous to receive pleasure. It can be one of the hardest things to do. Were you a person who was told that you're a spoiled brat, or that you're high maintenance, or do you worry about being perceived in those ways? It's really common, and it's like it's embedded in our culture to shame those sides of us that want to receive, to shame the sides of us that want to engage with more. So this is all about bringing attention to our relationship with alignment and with nourishment and with receiving. How this is, again, how we express affection and how we enjoy the beauty around us. The Empress is an invitation to romanticize the fuck out of your life. This brings a sense of richness into our lives. Consider this. If we are unavailable to receiving, if we have a difficult, sticky, weird relationship with receiving, then beauty has nowhere to go. Pleasure has nowhere to go. We have to be available to receiving beauty. We have to be willing to hold it and have it. Otherwise, it has nowhere to go. Where does it go? Where does it exist? What does it do? We're doing a disservice, not only to ourselves, like majorly to ourselves, but not only to ourselves, also to those things that are beautiful and to those things that are pleasurable. How does it feel when you offer somebody a compliment and they shut it down or reject it? Sucks. It sucks. In all kinds of ways. Like, it doesn't feel good to witness that, and it doesn't feel good to be on the giving end and to have something be rejected, right? We have to be available and open and welcoming of beauty and pleasure so that it has somewhere to go, so that it can blossom and be in the full force of its potential. It is probably not impossible, but it is really difficult to have an orgasm that you're not willing to have. Right? There has to be some level of willingness and openness to receiving that level of pleasure. So the Empress is all about opening and expanding what we're comfortable with receiving. It's an invitation to root down into radical receptivity. I use the word radical a lot. And it applies just anytime something feels radical. I'm using the word to describe the word. That doesn't work. But right, radical receptivity is all about like being open to receive, even when it feels crazy, even when it feels like, whoa, this is not the norm. Radical receptivity, because of deep-rooted beliefs we have about taking. We believe that it's not okay to have pleasure. We have trouble with feeling deserving of pleasure. And we get to decide what we receive. We don't need permission or permission from outside of us or proof that we've earned it, or we don't need a permission slip. You can write your own permission slip. And let me remind you that what we've been given isn't necessarily what we deserve. And we can see that all the time in all kinds of different scenarios and in injustices, right? What we have been given isn't necessarily a reflection of what we deserve. I don't think I'll elaborate any, well, I mean, yeah, I don't think I'll elaborate anymore, but just know that just because this is what you've been given permission to have or what you've been shown in the past, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's what you deserve. You can write yourself a permission slip to receive more, to be open to receiving more. We get to heal those parts of us that question whether we are deserving of this, that, or the other thing. And here's why. Here's part of why. There's a whole bunch of whys, but here's part of why. When you're more available to receiving, to practice receiving, you become so much better at giving, right? Rather than filling up your cup and then giving, and then filling up your cup and then giving, and then filling up, and like this never ending, like living paycheck to paycheck with our energetic ability to give and receive. Rather than living paycheck to paycheck, what if you were able to give from your own overflow? When you're able to open up and receive more and more and more pleasure, happiness, beauty, we then get to give so much better, and we get to give from our overflow so much more. If, just consider this for yourself, if you were more present and more welcoming of receiving, do you think you would be a better steward of this planet? Do you think you would be an even more effective agent for change? An effective agent for advocating for equity? If you were able to receive more and fill your cup up more, what do you think the ripple effect would be in your world, in your life? If our relationship with the receiving were better, maybe we wouldn't feel so panicked to take at any given opportunity. There's a big difference between taking and receiving. Reflect on that for a bit. This is an invitation to focus in on opening up, dilating, being present to receiving what is actually here. This is an invitation to surrender. Adopt a belief that receiving is your birthright. We don't need to know why. We receive life and breath and nourishment from the moment we are born, and we don't know why. We take that first breath with our baby lungs with oxygen, and we receive, we're both received into the world, and we receive the world, and we don't know why. It's our birthright. We begin receiving oxygen and nourishment from the moment we're born. I love this idea of romanticizing your life. Romanticize the fuck out of your life. Romanticize everything. Put on some rose-colored glasses. This doesn't mean pulling the wool over your eyes and not being willing to look at what isn't so pretty and what isn't so pleasurable. And romanticize the fuck out of your life. And if there's a part of you that's like, ooh, but if I do that, like, be with that part of you. What are the objections that might come up for you around romanticizing your life? I want to challenge that part of you. If you're not so sure about that idea, why not? What is the harm, truly? What would the harm be in you romanticizing your life? Remind yourself that the more open you are to receiving, the less you need to take, the better you are at giving. Yes, there's so much medicine all around us, and it's yours for the taking. Not taking, receiving. It's yours for the receiving. Find it everywhere, in the air, in the grass, in the foods and the water that you consume. Find medicine and nourishment. Romanticize those things. And this is where it becomes radical, right? Can you receive medicine and receive nourishment and receive pleasure, even if, even when it's the hardest to do so? I mentioned the grass and the air outside and the water, with full awareness that the air that we breathe is polluted. Right now, at the time of me filming this, my state is suffering from fires, and I can smell the smoke almost every morning when I wake up. So it's harder to find nourishment and medicine in that air, right? And I'm aware that there isn't fresh water for everybody. Flint, Michigan is still doesn't have water. More injustice, more imbalance, more inequity, right? And it is so important to even though those things exist, and even though that is true, acknowledge the privilege that you have, and be willing to receive nourishment and pleasure and beauty. We cut ourselves off from that, especially when there is so much injustice in the world. We feel undeserving of it. Why should I have fresh water when so many people don't? And that's fair, and that's true. And I think it's important to acknowledge that privilege. And I will not stop myself from receiving nourishment and receiving pleasure, and engaging with thankfulness for the resource of water. I'm going to romanticize the fuck out of my water, especially because so many people don't have it. So in the card, we see that this being is surrounded by supportive nature. There's pomegranates representing abundance. There's symbols of connection and like connection with God, or source, or the universe, or just knowing and knowledge, however you want to consider it. This being is willing and ready to be fanned and fed grapes, and just the name of the Empress itself implies that they rule. They literally rule. They hopefully this being governs fairly and is able to give with ease. And so, some questions to ask yourself: how can you deepen your receiving? How can you open up to being more willing to receive? Examine any sort of ancestral or generational, cultural, familial messaging that you've received around receiving. What were you told in your family about being a spoiled brat, or about being high maintenance? What are you told in your culture? What are you told in your religion about receiving? Is it okay to receive? Is it okay to share what we have? Just what kind of messaging have you gotten about this in the past? What stories exist in your family and your culture and your communities around receiving and around giving? In a lot of ways, we prioritize giving, which sounds great. That sounds like the thing to do. That sounds better to prioritize giving, right? What if we prioritized receiving? And that doesn't mean being selfish. It doesn't mean not giving. And what if you prioritize receiving a little more? Where are you open to receiving? Where does your threshold of comfort and permission end? Where does your threshold for comfort and permission end? Yeah, where where does it start to feel like too much? Can you receive a simple compliment? Or does that feel like too much? Do you reject compliments, gifts, time, pleasure, orgasms? Where are you comfortable with and uncomfortable with receiving? Just take stock, take inventory of where you stand with that right now. Ask yourself, look around right now. What is around you right now that you can practice receiving with? Can you engage? Do you have fresh air? Are there flowers nearby? Can you really receive a sip of water? Not just drink it, but like receive it, you know? And as you do this work, I want to encourage you to be bold enough to name what you deserve, to state what it is that you deserve and what you want. Be bold and brave enough to declare it. I think that's important. That's the Empress. That's more Venus energy, being open to receiving. The more we're open to receive, the more we're able to create beauty. And remember that Libra is all about creating comfort and beauty, right? Now, the swords. Kind of brief talking about the swords. I pulled them all out of my deck just to kind of illustrate. The swords can be intense. Let me just show a couple of them. That's an intense image. That the Three of Swords is an intense image. 3 swords piercing through a heart, right? And there's rain in the background. Let's see. This one often feels a little icky. This one feels mischievous and icky. Scary. The swords can be intense. This air energy can be really intense. Look how distraught this person looks here. And like in the 8, this person is bound and stuck and blindfolded. It's intense energy. The 10 of Swords. Talk about an intense image, right? Now, the swords are all about the swords are air energy, and air energy is all about the mind and communication and brain chemistry, right? So when we're in air energy or when we pull swords, we know that we're talking about like the brain. This can mean mental health, this can mean mental illness, this can mean our fears. And with air energy, there's always some sort of movement happening. As a rule, we can know that there's some sort of movement happening. There's always some sort of growth. There's always something to learn or to do or to explore. My tarot teacher, Lindsay Max, the Suit of Swords invites us to befriend our brain chemistry. So this is an opportunity to get really curious about our thinking and the ways our brain works, so that we can stop identifying so much with our thoughts, so that we can drive the car, so that we can take the brain out of the driver's seat and step into the driver's seat. We get to be in charge rather than our brain being in charge. This is where we learn that our thoughts and our beliefs are not necessarily the truth. So that's a big reminder that we need a lot of the time. The things that we believe, and we can really, really believe it, and we can create a PowerPoint of evidence of why we believe it and why we've been shown it. And our beliefs and our thoughts are not necessarily true. The feelings, the things that we feel are not facts. The story the brain tells us is often much worse than reality, right? The brain's whole job is to keep us alive and keep us safe and keep us safe. And we have a responsibility to check these narratives. We have a responsibility to engage with our beliefs, thoughts, and feelings in a way where they are not driving the car. Again, keeping these narratives in check can really set us free. Because again, the brain's job is to keep us really safe. And it does that by keeping us like stuck, kind of, stuck in what we know and stuck in what feels comfortable. So when we're able to engage with our brain in a new way, and when we're able to acknowledge that the things that we think and the things that we feel and the things that we believe are not necessarily the way that it is, that can set us free from this comfort zone. It's like these sword cards that are so intense and scary is describing, it's describing the story of how horrible this thing might be. So when we pull a card like this, we can say, like the Ten of Swords, we can say like, ooh, this feels really scary. This feels like a death. This feels like overkill. This feels like we've been stabbed in the back 10 times with 10 swords and we're left for dead. You can really feel that way. This points to the way that we just interpret the world. The brain operates in a lot of ways. The brain operates like a predator. It keeps us safe. It doesn't want us to evolve. It doesn't want us to, the brain operates like a predator because it does things to keep us isolated. It tells us things to keep us alone and isolated and feeling kind of weak, right? So anytime our brain is saying things like, don't tell them that, nobody else will believe you, nobody else will empathize with that, you shouldn't be feeling that way. Anytime the brain tries to, anytime we have stories in our brain about what other people will think of us or how we're coming across, we can kind of check in with that and examine, like, is my brain trying to keep me from something? You know, this especially happens when we're on the precipice of something expansive and amazing. It's almost even a good sign when the brain is super fucking freaked out about something, because it says that the brain is really threatened. And when the brain is threatened, that can often mean that we're about to expand into something new, that we're about to step into something that might feel really scary and risky. And usually, maybe not usually, like there's some work to be done there, right? Like there's use common sense, engage with common sense, right? Is your brain trying to isolate you and keep you where you are because something truly is dangerous and you really shouldn't be engaging with it? Or is your brain trying to isolate you and you're feeling freaked the fuck out because something's about to be different and you're about to experience a change in your life or create a change in your life that just feels scary and risky because you're about to grow and expand the comfort zone? The brain doesn't want to expand the comfort zone because then that's too much. It's too much comfort zone. It's too much zone to manage. But you can manage more zone. Sorry, I don't know what I'm saying. So learning how to say things like, my brain is telling me blank. My brain is inviting me to believe blank. That can really help us kind of disengage from, or just create a little space between what the brain is inviting us into and where we are. Identifying it as operations of the brain is a really great first start, because then we can evaluate it a little bit more. rather than saying, I'm crazy for doing this, you know, just for an example, rather than saying that would be crazy. I'm crazy for even thinking that would happen. Shifting that into my brain is telling me that's crazy allows us to kind of get a little more meta with ourselves and a little more meta with the situation, and actually observe and actually evaluate whether or not that's true. Sometimes it might be true. I think a lot of the time it's probably not true, and it's probably just a function of the brain trying to keep you where you are, trying to keep you safe. And we can say, thanks, brain, but I'm going to drive this car. Thanks, brain, but I'm going to do this thing that feels so risky and crazy. Thanks, brain, but I'm going to tell my friend how I feel because I need some support, you know? Remember that the brain is in its highest service when it is serving the soul. And there's a lot of, even myself in the past, I've talked about like the brain versus the soul, because that's how it can feel a lot of the time. It feels like our soul is here to expand and explore and take risks and be crazy and like do the things that feel good. Like our soul is here to expand, and again, our brain is here to keep us safe and keep us comfortable and keep us in what we know. Really, the brain is in its highest service when it is helping support our soul's work and our soul's calling. So explore that. We get to explore that. The affirmation for this week, the mantra for this week, comes from like a poem. I think it's a poem called The Charge of the Goddess by Doreen Valiente. I'm guessing at the pronunciation. And this has been an affirmation earlier on in expansive astrology this year. I think it's beautiful, and it speaks to all three of these energies. It speaks to the sword energy, air energy, and allowing our brains to engage with things that might feel crazy. It speaks to Empress energy and opening ourselves up to receiving and being in pleasure. And it speaks to Justice energy, where we are agents for beauty and we're agents for change. So the affirmation is, all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. I love this one. It's why this has been an affirmation 2 times so far in expansive astrology this year. All acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. How beautiful is that? And what would unfold for you if that were wholeheartedly, fully true in your life? So I think that's complete. I think that's all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for being here. I really hope that this inspires and helps you tap into this energy even more and feel even more empowered as we are floating through Libra season. I will see you next week. We're going to be talking about relationships, all things relationships, dependency, like codependency, engaging in conflict, finding intimacy, making sure we feel whole outside of relationships, but also making sure that we are willing to engage with relationships, right? A lot is coming at you next week, so I can't wait to see you there. Make sure if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Let me know how this lands for you in the comments down below. Give the video a like if this has been helpful for you. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear how this is landing for you. Again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. Take good, really good care of yourself. I'll see you soon. Bye.